I'm Conway, 31 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the problem child in my family. Last summer, my sister Andrea screamed that I'd ruined their lives, while my mother coldly stated they'd be happier without me. Instead of fighting back, I simply walked away from everything I'd ever known. After 6 months of silence, I woke up this morning to 14 missed calls from the family who claimed they were better off without me. Before I tell you how my life changed, after walking away from my toxic family, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and hit subscribe if you've ever had to make the difficult choice to protect your own. Peace. Growing up in a middle-class suburb of Boston, my childhood looked picture-perfect from the outside. Our two-story colonial with the white picket fence was the embodiment of the American dream, but appearances can be deceiving. Inside those walls, I was constantly reminded that I didn't quite measure up to the family standard. My father Richard was a workaholic accountant who spent more time with spreadsheets than with his children. His perpetual absence was punctuated by brief appearances, where he'd ask about grades and achievements rather than feelings or dreams. He wasn't cruel, just emotionally unavailable, his affection conditional on accomplishments I could never seem to attain. "Conway, the Edwards men have always excelled in math and science," he'd say, whenever I brought home anything less than an A in those subjects. "You need to apply yourself more." My mother, Margaret, was a former elementary school teacher who quit to become a full-time mother. She channeled all her perfectionist tendencies into crafting our family image. Our home was immaculate, our clothes always pressed, and our achievements prominently displayed. At least Andrea's achievements were. "What will the neighbors think?" became her mantra whenever I failed to conform to her expectations. The constant pressure to maintain appearances left little room for authentic connection or understanding. Then there was my sister Andrea, 3 years older and light years ahead in our parents' estimation. She collected academic awards like others collected baseball cards. Valedictorian debate team captain, and eventually accepted to an Ivy League university with a full scholarship. Andrea knew exactly how to play the game, how to be the daughter my parents wanted. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" became the soundtrack of my childhood, a question that implied I was broken in some fundamental way. What none of them understood was that I was struggling with undiagnosed ADHD. Sitting still in class was torture. Focusing on subjects that didn't capture my imagination was nearly impossible, and organization was a foreign concept. But in the early 90s, unless you were bouncing off the walls, ADHD wasn't on most parents' radar, especially not my parents, who preferred to attribute my struggles to character flaws. "He's just lazy," my mother would tell teachers during conferences. "He could do it if he tried," my father would add. But I was trying harder than anyone knew. I'd stay up late studying only to freeze during tests. I'd organize my backpack only to lose important papers by lunchtime. Each failure reinforced their narrative about me, and eventually I began to believe it too. The one bright spot was my creative ability. Stories poured out of me effortlessly. My English teachers praised my writing, my imagination, my unique voice. But at home, these talents were dismissed as impractical. "You can't make a living telling stories," my father would scoff. "Writing is a hobby, not a career," my mother would add. By high school, I developed coping mechanisms, self-deprecating humor, a carefree attitude that masked deep insecurity, and lowered expectations for myself. If I pretended not to care about success, failure wouldn't hurt as much. But deep down, the pain of being the family disappointment never lessened. When college application time came, I didn't even consider creative writing programs despite my English teacher's encouragement. Instead, I applied to business schools desperate for my father's approval. When I was accepted to a respectable state university, it was the first time I saw a glimmer of pride in his eyes. "Maybe he's finally growing up," I overheard him tell my mother. Those words fueled me through my first semester, but business courses were my academic kryptonite. Numbers swam before my eyes. Economic theories refused to stick in my brain, and presentations left me paralyzed with anxiety. Meanwhile, the one elective I took, creative writing, became my sanctuary. My professor pulled me aside after class one day. "Conway, you have a gift," she said. "I rarely see this level of talent in undergraduate students." Her words were both validation and torment. I doubled down on business classes, hired tutors, formed study groups, but my grades continued to plummet. By the end of sophomore year, I was on academic probation while my creative writing portfolio had won a university award. When I called home with the news about the writing award hoping for some acknowledgement, my mother sighed. "That's nice, dear, but how are your business classes going?" The truth came out during winter break of my junior year. My academic advisor had suggested I change majors, acknowledging that business wasn't playing to my strengths. When I broached the subject at dinner, my father's fork clattered against his plate. "Absolutely not. No son of mine is going to waste my money on some useless arts degree." "Your sister is in medical school now," my mother added. "She's never changed course or given up when things got difficult." The comparison to Andrea was the final straw. I returned to school determined to prove them wrong, but 3 weeks later I had a complete breakdown during a finance exam. The next day I withdrew from the university too, ashamed to tell my parents, until I showed up at home with all my belongings. The disappointment in their eyes that day haunts me still. Moving back home at 21 felt like admitting defeat. My childhood bedroom with its faded posters and high school trophies became both refuge and prison. Each morning, I'd endure breakfast with my parents, their silence more condemning than any words could be. The Sullivan's son just made partner at his law firm. My mother would casually mention passing the orange juice. "Andrea called last night. She's acing all her medical school exams," my father would add. I took whatever jobs I could find: barista, bookstore, clerk, dog walker, anything to contribute to household expenses and escape the suffocating disappointment at home. But these positions were just day jobs to me. At night when the house was quiet, I wrote. Hunched over my laptop until the early hours, I poured my heart into a novel creating worlds where people like me weren't failures, but heroes. 6 months after moving home, Andrea announced her engagement to Benjamin, a surgical resident she'd met in medical school. He came from money, had model good looks, and charmed my parents instantly. Their joy was palpable, their pride evident in every phone call they made to share the news. Our daughter, the future doctor marrying a surgeon, my mother, gushed to her friends. Benjamin's father plays golf with the hospital board chairman, my father noted approvingly. The contrast between their reaction to Andrea's news and their ongoing disappointment in me couldn't have been clearer. When I mentioned I'd completed the first draft of my novel, my mother nodded absently while sorting through engagement party invitations. "That's nice, Conway. Could you pick up Andrea's dress from the dry cleaner tomorrow?" I submitted my manuscript to 20 publishers and received 20 rejections. Each one stung, but none as much as knowing I couldn't share my disappointment with my family. They had expected failure, and I had delivered. The tension at home reached a breaking point during a family dinner 3 weeks before Andrea's engagement party. Benjamin was joining us, and my mother had prepared an elaborate meal. As we sat around the table listening to Andrea and Benjamin discuss their future medical practices, I made a decision. "I've been thinking about my next steps," I said. During a rare lull in the conversation, "I'm going to focus on writing full-time." The silence that followed was deafening. My father set down his wine glass with deliberate slowness. "When are you going to grow up, Conway?" he asked, his voice tight with frustration. "Writing is not a career. It's time to be realistic." "Your father's right," my mother added, her smile strained. "You need a real job with benefits and stability. There's an opening in the administrative department at your father's firm." Benjamin shifted uncomfortably, while Andrea studied her engagement ring, avoiding the tension. "I am being realistic." I countered, fighting to keep my voice steady. "I'm good at writing. It's the one thing I've always been good at." "Being good at something doesn't mean you can make a living from it," my father replied. "I'm good at golf, but I didn't throw away my accounting degree to join the PGA Tour." The comparison was so absurd I almost laughed, but the seriousness in his expression stopped me. They truly believed my dream was equivalent to a weekend hobby. That night I lay awake wondering if they were right. Maybe I was being irresponsible. Maybe I was just setting myself up for more failure. But the thought of spending my life in a cubicle working with spreadsheets and dying inside every day seemed worse than any rejection letter. The weeks leading up to Andrea's engagement party were filled with frantic preparations. Despite my hurt feelings, I helped, where I could, hanging decorations, picking up catering orders, assembling gift bags for guests. I wanted to show my parents I could be supportive, that I wasn't completely selfish. But my efforts went largely unnoticed. The focus was entirely on creating the perfect event for Andrea and Benjamin. My mother fretted over floral arrangements, while my father worried about impressing Benjamin's parents. The day before the party, I overheard a conversation that confirmed what I'd always suspected. I was returning from the garage with extra chairs when I heard my parents in the kitchen. "Andrea has made us so proud," my mother was saying. "Top of her class, engaged to a wonderful man from a good family." "She's always been our easy child," my father agreed. "Responsible, motivated, successful." "If only Conway could follow her example," my mother sighed. "I worry about him. 30 years old and still chasing childish dreams." "He needs to face reality sometime," my father responded. "We can't support him forever." I set the chairs down silently and slipped back outside, their words ringing in my ears. I was 31, not 30, but they couldn't even get that right. In their eyes, I wasn't just a disappointment. I was a burden they were tired of carrying. The day of Andrea's engagement party arrived with perfect weather, and my mother in a state of controlled panic. I was assigned to parking duty, directing guests to designated spots on our street and in the driveway. Benjamin's family arrived in luxury vehicles that made my 10-year-old Honda look like it belonged in a junkyard. His father, Dr. James Whitfield, stepped out of a Mercedes, with surgical precision adjusting his tailored suit, before extending a manicured hand to me. "You must be Conway. Benjamin has mentioned you." His tone suggested whatever Benjamin had said hadn't been flattering. "That's me. The parking attendant/brother of the bride-to-be," I joked, immediately regretting my self-deprecating humor when his smile didn't reach his eyes. As I escorted the Whitfields into the house, I overheard Benjamin's mother whisper, "Is that the brother who dropped out of college?" By mid-afternoon, our backyard had transformed into a showcase of Boston's upper-middle-class elite. Doctors, lawyers, and executives mingled under white tents, champagne flutes in hand. I moved between groups, feeling increasingly invisible, except when introduced as Andrea's brother, with that slightly apologetic tone my mother used. "Conway is exploring his options right now," she'd explained vaguely, when asked what I did, as if unemployment was a career choice. I retreated to bartending duty, finding comfort in the simple task of pouring drinks and making small talk. As the celebration progressed, I watched my parents beam with pride as Andrea and Benjamin circulated among guests. They looked like they belonged on a wedding cake topper, perfect, polished, promising. The trouble began during the toast. My father had just finished a moving speech about Andrea's accomplishments and bright future when someone thrust a champagne flute into my hand, insisting I join the toast. As I moved forward through the crowd, a guest stepped back, suddenly bumping my elbow. The champagne sloshed forward, splashing across the front of Andrea's cream-colored designer dress, a dress she'd spent weeks selecting. The gasp from the crowd was audible. Andrea looked down at the spreading stain, her face transitioning from shock to fury. "Are you serious right now?" she hissed, grabbing a napkin from a nearby table. "This dress cost $2,000. "I'm so sorry," I stammered, reaching to help. "Someone bumped into me." "It's always something with you, isn't it?" Andrea's voice rose, drawing more attention. "Can't you do anything right? Just once?" My mother rushed over with club soda and more napkins, her face tight with embarrassment and anger. "Conway, how could you be so careless?" "It was an accident," I protested, feeling like a child again. "I didn't mean to." "You never mean to," Andrea snapped, dabbing frantically at the stain. "But you always manage to ruin important moments. My graduation, my white coat ceremony, and now my engagement party." "Andrea, sweetheart, let's get you inside to clean up," my mother soothed, shooting me a withering look. "Conway, please just step back." I retreated, mortified, as whispers rippled through the crowd. Benjamin followed Andrea and my mother inside, leaving me alone with the staring guests and my father's rigid disappointment. "Perhaps you could help in the kitchen," he suggested quietly, a command disguised as a request. I spent the next hour hiding in the kitchen, arranging dessert platters and avoiding eye contact with the catering staff who had witnessed my humiliation. When I finally ventured out with coffee service, Andrea had changed into another dress and the party had resumed. but the tension remained a fault line waiting to rupture. The breaking point came as guests were leaving. I was collecting discarded plates near the garden when Andrea approached Benjamin, hovering uncertainly behind her. "I want you to know," she said, voice low but intense, "that I had to change into my backup dress because you ruined my first choice. The photographer had to Photoshop our earlier pictures because of you." "Andrea, I've apologized repeatedly. It was an accident." I kept my voice level, exhausted by the drama over a dress. "It's never your fault, is it?" she continued, color rising in her cheeks. "Nothing ever, Island. You drift through life making messes that other people have to clean up." My mother appeared at Andrea's elbow, concern etched on her face. "What's going on here?" "I'm just telling Conway how tired I am of his perpetual screw-ups affecting everyone around him," Andrea declared loud enough that nearby lingering guests turned to watch. "Andrea, maybe we should discuss this later," Benjamin suggested gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. She shrugged him off. "No, I'm done pretending everything's fine. Do you know what it's been like growing up with him? Always having to be the responsible one, the successful one, while he gets endless second chances." The unfairness of her characterization stung worse than any rejection letter. "That's not true. You've always been the golden child. I've always been the disappointment. Because you've chosen to be." Andrea's voice rose further. "You've had every opportunity I've had, but you waste them. You dropped out of college. You can't hold a real job. You live with our parents at 30. "I'm 31, I corrected automatically, which only inflamed her further. "See, that's exactly what I mean. You focus on trivial details instead of the big picture. You've spent your entire life making excuses instead of making something of yourself." My father appeared, now drawn by the commotion. "Let's all calm down," he said, using his accountant's voice of reason. "No, Dad, I'm done," calming down. Andrea continued, tears of frustration forming in her eyes. "Do you know what Benjamin's parents asked me? If Conway's issues run in the family? They're worried about genetics." Benjamin winced visibly. Andrea 3 never said. "It doesn't matter what you said," she cut him off. "The point is, his failures reflect on all of us. They always have." Something snapped inside me then. Years of accumulated hurt crystallized into a cold clarity. Is that what I am to you? A genetic defect. A family embarrassment. You've ruined our lives. Andrea shouted, the raw emotion in her voice silencing the remaining guests. Every family gathering, every holiday, every special occasion has to accommodate Conway's feelings, Conway's failures, Conway's needs. My mother, rather than defending me, nodded along with Andrea's tirade. When she finally spoke, her words cut deeper than any that had come before. "We'd be happier without you," she said simply. The quiet delivery, making it worse somehow. "We love you, Conway, but sometimes I think we'd all be better off if you just—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The implication was clear: if I just disappeared. Benjamin looked horrified. A few remaining guests pretended sudden interest in their phones. My father stared at the ground, his silence an endorsement of their assessment. In that moment, I saw my family with perfect clarity for the first time. Not as the people I'd spent my life trying to please, but as they truly were, individuals who valued appearance over authenticity, achievement over happiness, conformity over creativity. And I made a decision that would change everything. I didn't respond to Andrea's outburst or my mother's devastating statement. What was there to say? They had finally spoken their truth, the unvarnished reality that had lurked beneath polite facades for years. I simply nodded, turned, and walked back into the house while conversations awkwardly resumed behind me. In my childhood bedroom, surrounded by participation trophies and framed school photos documenting my journey from hopeful child to disappointing adult, I sat on the edge of my bed and felt strangely calm. The worst had happened, my deepest fears confirmed, yet I was still breathing, still existing. Sleep came fitfully that night, memories cycling through my mind like scenes from a movie I'd watched too many times. My father's sigh when I brought home a C in algebra. My mother's tight smile when I wasn't accepted to my father's alma mater. Andrea's eye roll when I mentioned my writing. A lifetime of small wounds that had formed a gaping hole in my self-worth. Morning light filtered through blinds I'd had since high school, waking me to the sounds of activity downstairs. Voices drifted up through the heating vent, a feature of our old house that had allowed me to eavesdrop on adult conversations since childhood. The Richardsons asked about Conway's situation, my mother was saying, her voice tinged with embarrassment. I didn't know what to tell them. What's to tell, Andrea replied. He's 30 years old. 31, my father corrected, surprising me. Whatever, Andrea continued dismissively. He's an adult who can't support himself and ruins every important occasion. Did you see the look on Monica Whitfield's face when he spilled champagne on my dress? Let's not rehash it. My father sounded tired. The party was otherwise a success. No thanks to Conway, my mother added. I don't understand where we went wrong with him. There it was again, the fundamental belief that I was a problem to be solved, a mistake they had made. In that moment, something crystallized within me. They would never see me differently. No achievement would ever be enough. No apology ever accepted. I would always be the family disappointment, the cautionary tale, the burden. I wouldn't give them the chance to reject me again. Moving quietly, I retrieved my duffel bag from the closet and began packing methodically. Clothes, toiletries, laptop, external hard drive, with my writing, and the framed photo of my grandfather, the only family member who had ever encouraged my creativity before his death when I was 12. I didn't take much. Most possessions can be replaced, and I wanted to travel light for whatever came next. From my dresser drawer, I pulled out the emergency cash I'd been saving, just over $2,000. Not enough to live on for long, but enough to get away and find my footing. As I packed, I listened to my family continue breakfast downstairs, discussing Andrea's wedding plans, as if yesterday's confrontation had never happened. My name wasn't mentioned again. Perhaps they'd said all they needed to say. I wrote a brief note and left it on my made bed. I won't be a burden anymore. Take care. 5 words that encompassed a lifetime of hurt and a decision that terrified and liberated me in equal measure. Carrying my bag, I took one last look at the room that had witnessed my childhood dreams and adult disappointments. The bookshelf filled with stories that had transported me away from my reality. The desk where I'd written late into the night. The window with the view of the old oak tree I'd tried to climb when I was 10, breaking my arm in the process. Another failure in my family's ledger. I descended the back stairs that led directly to the side door, avoiding the dining room, where my family's voices still mingled over coffee and criticisms. My car keys made a slight jingling sound as I pulled them from my pocket, and I froze irrationally, afraid of being caught in the act of leaving, as if I were a teenager sneaking out, not a 31-year-old man choosing to walk away. No one came to investigate the noise. I slipped outside into the crisp morning air, stowed my bag in the trunk of my Honda, and backed out of the driveway without a backward glance. The initial drive was automatic muscle memory guiding me through familiar streets while my mind raced with questions. Where would I go? What would I do? How would I support myself? Beneath these practical concerns lay deeper fears. Was I making a terrible mistake? Was I proving them right about my irresponsibility? Would I end up crawling back, validating their low opinion of me? I drove for hours with no destination in mind. Just the need to put distance between myself and the house that had never felt like home. Gas station coffee and drive-through meals sustained me as suburbs gave way to countryside, then to coastline. When exhaustion finally overtook me, I pulled into a budget motel off the highway, paid for a single night, and collapsed onto sheets that smelled of industrial detergent. That first night alone was a strange mixture of grief and relief. I mourned the family I had always wanted but never had. I grieved for the child who had tried so hard to earn love that should have been unconditional. But beneath the sadness was an undercurrent of something unfamiliar: freedom. No disapproving glances over the breakfast table. No comparisons to Andrea's latest achievement. No subtle reminders of my inadequacies. Just silence and the possibility of reinvention. Morning came with pale sunlight through thin curtains, and the realization that no one had called to check if I was safe. I checked my phone, no missed calls, no text messages, no frantic emails, wondering where I'd gone. Their silence confirmed what yesterday's confrontation had made clear: My absence was a relief, not a cause for concern. I had expected the knowledge to hurt, but instead, it felt like the final confirmation I needed. It was time to build a life where I was valued, not merely tolerated. With that resolution, I checked out of the motel and continued driving north along the coast, where the endless horizon seemed to promise new beginnings. 3 days and 300 miles later, I found myself in Newport, a small coastal town with a working harbor and a modest tourist trade. Something about the place called to me, perhaps the way the morning fog rolled in from the sea, shrouding the town in mystery, or how the afternoon sun transformed the harbor water into a canvas of dancing light. It felt removed from my old life, a place where no one had preconceived notions about who I was or what I should become. My funds were limited, so my first priority was finding affordable lodging and employment. The off-season rates at motels were manageable in the short term, but not sustainable. On my third day in town, while having coffee at a local cafe, I overheard an elderly woman complaining to the barista about her difficulty finding a reliable tenant for her boarding house. "Young people today don't want simple accommodations," she lamented. "They all want luxury apartments with gyms and swimming pools." I approached her table cautiously. "Excuse me," I couldn't help overhearing. "I'm actually looking for a place to stay long-term, and I'm not concerned about luxury amenities." Martha Peterson was 78 years old, a widow who supplemented her modest pension by renting out rooms in her Victorian home, overlooking the harbor. Her shrewd blue eyes assessed me over wire-rimmed glasses as I explained my situation, a sanitized version that mentioned relocating for a fresh start but omitted family estrangement. "I need someone quiet who pays on time and doesn't throw wild parties," she said bluntly. "The room is small, but has a private bath and access to the shared kitchen. $500 monthly utilities included." It was a bargain in a coastal town, even in the off-season. We shook hands, and by that evening, I was settled into a third-floor room with slanted ceilings and a window seat overlooking the harbor. The furniture was outdated but sturdy, the twin bed comfortable enough, and the built-in bookshelves a welcome sight for a writer. Employment came next. I spotted a help-wanted sign in the window of Harbor Books and Cafe, an independent bookstore with worn wooden floors and the comforting scent of paper and coffee. The owner, Liam Crawford, was a former literature professor who had traded academia for small-town bookselling after his own disillusionment with institutional politics. "Experience?" he asked during my impromptu interview. "I worked at a chain bookstore during college," I replied. "And I've spent most of my life reading everything I could get my hands on." Liam's follow-up question surprised me. "What are you reading right now?" We spent the next 20 minutes discussing contemporary fiction, and by the end I was hired part-time initially, with the possibility of more hours as tourist season approached. The pay wasn't much, but combined with my remaining savings and Martha's reasonable rent, it would keep me afloat while I figured out next steps. A routine developed naturally. Mornings began with coffee on Martha's wraparound porch, when weather permitted, then shifts at the bookstore, arranging displays, processing inventory, and helping customers find their next read. Evenings were for writing, no longer hiding in my childhood bedroom, but sitting proudly at the small desk in my rented room, or sometimes at a corner table in the bookstore, after hours when Liam invited me to stay. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who valued what I could contribute. Martha appreciated my help with household repairs and technology challenges. Liam respected my book recommendations and literary insights. Regular customers at the store began to ask for me, specifically trusting my suggestions. Conway has an uncanny ability to match readers with exactly the book they didn't know they needed, Liam told a distributor who visited the store, causing a warm flush of pride I rarely experienced. 6 weeks after arriving in Newport, Liam approached me with an idea. "We have this empty space upstairs that used to be a storage room. I've been thinking of hosting writing workshops there, but I'm more of a reader than a writer these days. Would you be interested in leading something like that?" The suggestion took my breath away. Me, lead a workshop. Why not? Liam shrugged. You clearly know what you're doing with your own writing, and you have a gift for talking about books in a way that's accessible but not dumbed down. Before I could formulate all the reasons I wasn't qualified, the list my family would have readily supplied, I heard myself say I'd love to try. The first workshop, drew only 4 participants: a retired English teacher, a high school student with literary ambitions, a fisherman who wrote poetry between outings, and a young mother working on a children's book. But their enthusiasm was genuine, their gratitude for the space to share their work humbling. By the 3rd session, attendance had doubled through word of mouth. Creating writing prompts for others sparked my own creativity. I began a new manuscript, different from anything I'd attempted before, a novel, inspired by local legends about the harbor and its history. The words flowed more easily without the weight of familial expectation, without the voice in my head questioning the practicality of my passion. As autumn faded into winter, I experienced another first genuine friendships. Martha's maternal concern manifested in home-cooked meals and gentle inquiries about my well-being. Liam's intellectual companionship provided stimulating conversations about literature and life. Emma, a local artist who frequented the cafe portion of the bookstore, became a confidant who understood creative struggles. Family can be our greatest supporters or our worst critics, she observed one evening, as we shared a bottle of wine at the local pub. Sometimes the family we choose is more important than the family we're born into. Her words resonated deeply, though I hadn't yet shared the full story of my departure with anyone in Newport. The shame of being rejected by my own family still felt too raw, too personal. When Christmas approached, a melancholy settled over me, despite my new circumstances. The holiday had never been particularly warm in my family, more an opportunity for my mother to showcase her perfect decorating and cooking than a time of genuine connection, but it was still family, still tradition. Martha noticed my subdued mood as she hung garlands along the stair banister. "First Christmas away from home is always hard," she said, not pressing for details I hadn't offered. "You're welcome to join me at my daughter's house for dinner. She always sets extra places for strays." The kindness of the invitation brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "Thank you, but I signed up for the Christmas shift at the bookstore." "Holiday pay," I explained, though money wasn't the primary motivation. "Well then, we'll celebrate Christmas Eve," instead, she declared, brooking no argument. That Christmas Eve dinner with Martha, her daughter's family, and 3 other strays from town was warmer than any holiday I could remember. There were no passive-aggressive comments, no comparisons to more successful relatives, no tension underlying the celebration. Just good food, genuine laughter, and acceptance. At the bookstore on Christmas Day, I checked my phone during a quiet moment. No calls, no texts, no acknowledgement from my family that I was missing from their gathering. Their silence continued to speak volumes about their feelings regarding my absence. But as I looked around the bookstore at customers, finding joy in newly discovered stories, as I remembered Martha's insistence on including me in her family celebration, as I thought about the writing workshop participants who valued my guidance, I realized something profound I wasn't missing anymore. For perhaps the first time in my life, I had found exactly where I belonged. Winter in Newport brought fierce storms that battered the coastline, sending waves crashing against the seawall and wind howling through the eaves of Martha's old Victorian. But inside, wrapped in a quilt she had made 40 years earlier, I wrote through the darkness, the weather outside a fitting backdrop for the climactic scenes of my manuscript. By early February, 6 months after leaving my family behind, I had completed a novel I truly believed in, a story about a coastal town harboring secrets and the outsider who discovers his own strength while uncovering them. Unlike my previous attempts, this manuscript wasn't written to prove something to my family or to escape from reality. It was written because the story demanded to be told, because the characters had become as real to me as the people I passed on Newport's narrow streets. "You should submit it," Liam urged, after reading the final draft. "This is good, Conway. Really good." The familiar fear of rejection surfaced immediately. "I've tried that road before. 20 form rejections last time." "That was a different book. A different you," he countered. "What's the worst that could happen?" "More rejection," I answered, automatically. "Which you've survived," before he pointed out. "But what's the best that could happen?" That question stayed with me as I researched literary agents specializing in the kind of atmospheric mystery I'd written. With Liam's encouragement and Emma's help crafting a compelling query letter, I submitted to 15 carefully selected agents, then tried to forget about it while continuing my routine at the bookstore and boarding house. 3 weeks later, an email arrived that changed everything. Carolyn Winters, a respected agent with an impressive client list, wanted to read the full manuscript. 2 days after sending it, my phone rang with a New York number. I couldn't put it down, Carolyn said after introducing herself. The sense of place, the layered characters, the slow burn tension, it's exactly what publishers are looking for right now. I'd like to represent you if you're still looking for an agent. The conversation that followed was surreal discussions of submission strategies, potential editors, timeline expectations. When we hung up, I sat on my window seat overlooking the harbor, watching fishing boats return as the sun set, trying to process what had just happened. Someone in the publishing industry, someone who evaluated books professionally, believed in my writing. Not just believed in it, but was excited about it, confident it would sell. The validation I'd sought from my family for years had come instead from a stranger who judged me solely on the merit of my work. I called Liam with the news, and his genuine excitement led to an impromptu celebration at the bookstore that evening. Martha baked her famous lemon cake, Emma, brought champagne, and regular customers who had watched me work quietly at the corner table for months raised glasses to toast my success. To Conway, Liam said, who had the courage to follow his passion and the talent to make it worthwhile. Their belief in me was humbling and healing in ways I couldn't articulate. For the first time, achievement felt like a shared joy, rather than an individual burden. Carolyn worked quickly. Within a month, she had submitted my manuscript to major publishers and generated significant interest. The bidding was modest by industry standards, but substantial to someone who had been living on part-time bookstore wages. When the dust settled, I had a 2-book deal with a respected publishing house, an advance that would support me for at least 2 years, and a tentative publication date 9 months away. The local newspaper ran a story about the hometown author, ironic given my recent arrival, but Newport had claimed me as their own. The article included a photo of me at Harbor Books, quotes from Liam about discovering a literary talent in his midst, and details about the forthcoming novel. I didn't think about my family seeing the article. Newport was hundreds of miles from Boston, the local paper hardly national news. But I had underestimated the reach of social media and the speed of small-town networks. 2 days after the article appeared online, my phone lit up with a notification. I never expected 14 missed calls. 5 from my sister Andrea, 4 from my mother, 3 from my father, and 2 from Benjamin, my almost brother-in-law. Along with the calls came text messages and voicemails, a sudden avalanche of communication after 6 months of silence. I stared at the screen, my stomach clenching with a mixture of emotions too complex to name. Why now? Why? After all this time, the answer was obvious, of course. Success. The thing they had always valued above all else had finally come my way, and suddenly I was worth contacting again. Martha found me on the porch that evening, staring at my silent phone, as if it might explode. With the intuition of someone who has lived long enough to recognize emotional turmoil, she sat beside me without speaking, her presence a quiet comfort. My family called, I finally said, breaking the silence. All of them, multiple times. Ah, she nodded, understanding immediately. And how do you feel about that? It was such a simple question, yet no one in my family had ever asked it. How did I feel? Not what would I do, or what was the practical solution, but how did I feel? Confused, angry, sad. The emotions tumbled out as I named them. Part of me wants to ignore them completely. Part of me wants to answer and tell them exactly what I think of their sudden interest. And a small pathetic part still wants their approval. Martha's weathered hand covered mine. There's nothing pathetic about wanting family connection. It's hardwired into us. The question is whether reconnecting would nurture you or drain you. I played the first voicemail, putting it on speaker so Martha could hear. Conway, it's Mom. We just heard the most amazing news. A publishing deal. We always knew you had potential. Call us back as soon as you can. We have so much to catch up on. The false enthusiasm, the revisionist history, claiming they had always known when they had actively discouraged my writing, it was exactly what I had expected and feared. Interesting, Martha commented mildly. She's rewriting the past quite efficiently there. Her observation broke the spell of the message, allowing me to hear it clearly for what it was. Not an apology, not an acknowledgement of their treatment, but an attempt to align themselves with my success retroactively. My father's message was similarly tone-deaf, awkward congratulations, followed by questions about the advance amount and contract details. The accountant in him focusing on financials rather than the achievement itself. Andrea's messages evolved from artificially bright baby brothers going to be famous to increasingly frustrated as I failed to respond, "Conway, stop being childish and call us back." The most genuine message came surprisingly from Benjamin Conway. "It's Benjamin. I just wanted to say congratulations on the book deal. That's a major accomplishment. Also, for what it's worth, I thought how your family treated you at the engagement party was wrong. I should have said something then. Sorry about that. Anyway, well done." Liam and Emma offered similar advice when I shared the situation: respond on my terms if at all. Maintain boundaries. Recognize that their reaction said more about them than about me. Success shouldn't be the price of admission for family love, Emma pointed out. Armed with their perspectives and my own hard-won clarity, I decided not to respond immediately. The book tour would eventually bring me to Boston. Perhaps that would be the appropriate time for a controlled in-person meeting, one where I could maintain the emotional boundaries I had established in their absence. As winter yielded to spring, my new life continued to flourish. The editing process for my novel was challenging but rewarding. The writing workshops at the bookstore had become so popular, we had to create a wait list. I moved from Martha's boarding house to a small waterfront apartment of my own, though I still had dinner with her weekly. The missed calls eventually stopped, replaced by occasional emails from my mother with increasing emotional manipulation. "Your father's birthday is next week. It would mean so much to him to hear from you." No acknowledgement of why I had left, no apology for what had been said, just an expectation that I would fall back into my assigned family role now that I had achieved something they deemed valuable. I saved each message, but maintained my silence, focusing instead on the second novel I had contracted to write, and the growing community of people who appreciated me for who I was, not what I had accomplished. When my publisher finalized the book tour schedule, including a stop at a major Boston bookstore, I knew the time for avoidance had passed. Whatever resolution was possible with my family, I would need to face it directly on my terms, as the person I had become in their absence, not the person they had tried to force me to be. Publication day arrived with surreal fanfare. My author photo appeared on Harbor Books' storefront window. The local radio station interviewed me about the novel and my writing journey. Advance reviews used words like compelling, atmospheric, and assured high praise for a debut novelist. The first leg of the book tour took me to West Coast cities, where I was simply an author promoting a new release, not a prodigal son, with a complicated family history. Each event boosted my confidence, each appreciative reader reinforcing that my words had value, that my voice deserved to be heard. As the tour date in Boston approached, my publisher's publicist called to discuss details. "Your hometown event is nearly sold out," she said cheerfully. "Do you have family or friends who need reserved seats? We can set aside a section up front." The question caught me off guard. "No, that won't be necessary." Really, hometown events usually have the biggest personal cheering sections. She sounded surprised. "Newport is my hometown now," I clarified, not elaborating further. Despite my non-response to their calls and messages, I knew my family would likely appear at the Boston signing. Andrea's final email had made it clear. "We'll see you when you come to Boston, whether you respond or not. Family supports family." The irony of that statement wasn't lost on me. The Boston event was scheduled at an upscale bookstore in Back Bay, less than 20 miles from my parents' house. As I stepped into the venue, the familiar weight of anxiety pressed against my chest, not the usual pre-event jitters, but the specific tension that had accompanied family interactions throughout my life. The store manager guided me through the crowded space to the signing table, pointing out the stack of my novels arranged in an elegant display. Seeing my name on the cover still felt like an out-of-body experience, a dream I might wake from at any moment. "We have a full house tonight," she informed me proudly. "Nearly 200 people." As the audience settled into rows of chairs, I scanned the crowd and immediately spotted them in the third row. My mother in a navy dress, I didn't recognize my father looking older than I remembered Andrea, with a tight smile and the tight Benjamin appearing vaguely uncomfortable beside her. The sight of them hit me with unexpected force. 6 months of silence, 6 months of building a new life, and still their presence could trigger the old feelings of inadequacy. But beneath those familiar insecurities was something new strength. I had survived their rejection. I had thrived, despite their predictions of failure. I had built connections based on mutual respect, rather than obligation or conditional approval. The store manager introduced me to enthusiastic applause. As I stepped to the podium, I caught my mother nudging my father and pointing proudly as if my achievement were somehow their doing. The old Conway might have been gratified by this display, desperate for any sign of approval. The person I had become recognized it for what it was: performance for the surrounding audience, not genuine pride. My prepared remarks focused on the novel's themes of belonging and identity, finding home in unexpected places, and the courage to start over, all elements drawn from my personal experience, but transformed through fiction. During the reading, I deliberately avoided looking at my family, addressing the wider audience who had come for the story, not the family drama. The Q&A session passed without incident until a familiar voice rose from the third row. Andrea, unable to resist claiming connection, prefaced her question with, "As the author's sister, I've always known he had a special way with words." The presumption of her statement, the casual rewriting of our history, sent a ripple of tension through me, but I maintained my professional demeanor, answering her question about my inspiration with a general response about coastal communities and their secrets. When the formal event concluded, and the signing line formed, I knew confrontation was inevitable. My family positioned themselves at the end of the line, clearly planning to have more time for conversation once the other attendees had dispersed. One by one, readers approached with copies to sign, many sharing personal connections to the story or questions about craft. I gave each my full attention, grateful for their genuine interest. As the line dwindled, my family advanced, their presence growing larger in my awareness. Finally, they stood before me at the signing table, the last remaining attendees besides store staff. "Conway." My mother spoke first, her voice wavering with emotion that seemed performative given our audience. "You look wonderful. Success suits you." "Thank you," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "It's good to see you all." An awkward silence followed, broken by my father clearing his throat. "We're very proud of you, son. Always knew you had it in you." The revisionist history again. Always knew, despite years of discouragement and dismissal. "Thank you for coming," I said, not acknowledging his claim. "Would you like me to sign copies for you?" "We already bought them online," Andrea interjected. "First editions. They might be valuable someday." Of course they had. Even in this moment, they viewed my work through the lens of potential monetary value rather than personal meaning. The store manager approached, sensing the tension. "We'll be closing in 15 minutes. There's a lovely cafe next door if you'd like to continue your reunion." The term reunion hung in the air, simultaneously accurate and inadequate to describe this charged encounter. "That would be wonderful," my mother seized the suggestion. "We have so much catching up to do." 20 minutes later, we sat at a corner table in the adjacent cafe, the familiar family dynamic already reasserting itself. My mother dominating conversation, my father adding practical observations. Andrea alternating between competitiveness and forced warmth, Benjamin watching carefully from the sidelines. "Your apartment must be lovely with that advance," my mother commented. "In Newport, you said. We should visit sometime." "The advance was modest by industry standards," I replied, not engaging with the invitation. "But yes, Newport has been good to me." "We tried to reach you," Andrea said, a hint of accusation in her tone. "Many times." "I know," I acknowledged. I needed space to focus on my writing. "For 6 months?" my mother asked, incredulously. "We were worried sick." The claim was so blatantly false, I couldn't let it pass. "Were you? You didn't file a missing persons report? You didn't contact any of my friends? You didn't reach out until you saw the newspaper article about my book deal?" My bluntness created immediate discomfort around the table. My father shifted in his seat, Andrea examined her coffee cup, and my mother's expression hardened. "We respected your note," my father said, finally. "You said not to worry. My note said, "I wouldn't be a burden anymore," I corrected. Which is exactly what you all made me feel like at Andrea's engagement party. A burden, a disappointment, a problem to be solved. Andrea had the grace to look slightly ashamed, but my mother's defensiveness emerged immediately. "You're exaggerating. Families have disagreements. If you just called, you told me you'd be happier without me." I interrupted, my voice steady, despite the emotional weight of the memory. "Those were your exact words, Mom. We'd be happier without you." So I removed myself from the equation. Benjamin, who had remained silent until now, spoke unexpectedly. "They were out of line that day, Conway. I told Andrea afterward." Andrea shot him a betrayed look. "We were stressed about the party. Things got out of hand." "Things didn't get out of hand," I countered. "You expressed what you truly felt. The problem isn't what you said, it's that you meant it. And now that I've achieved something you deem valuable, you want to pretend those feelings never existed." My mother reached across the table, attempting to take my hand. I pulled back gently but firmly. "We've always believed in you, Conway. We just wanted you to apply yourself to something practical." "No," I shook my head. "You wanted me to be someone I'm not. When I failed at that, you decided I was the failure, not your expectations." My father, ever the practical problem solver, tried a different approach. "The past is the past. We're here now, ready to support your success. Isn't that what matters?" "What matters," I said carefully, "is that I found people who value me whether I'm published or not. People who see my writing as a gift, not a hobby. People who don't measure my worth by my productivity or status." "We're your family." Andrea insisted, as if the biological connection trumped all other considerations. "You're my relatives," I corrected. "Family supports each other through failures, as well as successes. Family loves unconditionally. You only reached out when I had something you could be proud of, something that reflected well on you." The harsh truth landed heavily on the table between us. My mother's eyes filled with tears that seemed genuine for the first time. My father looked away, perhaps recognizing himself in my assessment. Andrea's defensive posture softened slightly. "So, that's it?" my mother asked. "You're cutting us out of your life completely?" The question deserved honest consideration. Despite everything, these people were part of my history, my DNA. Complete severance might satisfy momentary anger, but create lasting regret. "I'm not cutting you out," I said finally. "But I'm not resuming our relationship as if nothing happened either. If you want to be part of my life, it needs to be on new terms. No more conditions on your approval. No more comparisons. No more trying to mold me into someone I'm not." "And if we can't do that," my father asked, surprisingly direct. "Then we'll maintain polite distance," I replied simply. "I don't need you to understand my choices anymore. I don't need your validation. I'd like your love, but not at the cost of my self-worth." We talked for another hour, covering ground that should have been traversed years earlier. There were no dramatic apologies or tearful reconciliations like in the movies. Real family healing, I was learning, doesn't happen in a single conversation. It requires consistent change, demonstrated respect, and time. Perhaps the most precious resource of all. When we parted outside the cafe, my mother hugged me with uncharacteristic vulnerability. My father shook my hand, then awkwardly pulled me into a brief embrace. Andrea's goodbye was stiff, but not hostile. Benjamin whispered, "Well done," as we shook hands, and I wasn't sure if he meant the book or the conversation. The drive back to Newport the next day felt like emerging from a long tunnel into sunlight. The confrontation had been necessary, but returning to my chosen home brought immediate relief. Martha was waiting on her porch, eager to hear how the Boston event had gone. Liam had saved the newspaper coverage of the signing. Emma had left a congratulatory bouquet at my apartment. These were the people who had seen value in me when I couldn't see it in myself. They had offered connection without condition, support without agenda, love without leverage. They had taught me that family can be found as well as born into, and sometimes the found family heals what the birth family has wounded. In the months that followed, my relationship with my biological family evolved slowly. My father occasionally called with awkward but genuine interest in my writing process. My mother sent cards for holidays and birthdays, carefully avoiding the criticism that had previously been her default. Andrea and I established a cautious email correspondence, more cordial than close, but free from the competitive undertones that had characterized our earlier relationship. They were trying in their imperfect ways to accept the person I actually was, rather than the person they had wanted me to be. Whether these efforts would eventually build a healthier connection remained to be seen, but their attempt itself represented progress. Meanwhile, my life in Newport continued to flourish. The second novel took shape drawing on themes of reconciliation and chosen family. The writing workshops expanded to include weekend retreats. I began mentoring younger writers, finding unexpected fulfillment in helping others discover their unique voices. 1 year after walking away from my family's home, I purchased a small cottage overlooking the harbor, the first property I had ever owned bought, with earnings from words they had dismissed as worthless. As I arranged my desk by the window where I could watch fishing boats returning at sunset, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. Sometimes the greatest act of self-love is walking away from people who cannot see your worth. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is start over completely. And sometimes the family that truly matters is the one you build around yourself person by person, connection by connection, chosen deliberately rather than assigned by birth. My story isn't about revenge or proving people wrong. It's about finding the courage to be authentically yourself even when those who should love you most try to convince you that who you are isn't enough. It's about discovering that you don't need to set yourself on fire to keep others warm, and you don't need to dim your light to make anyone else comfortable with their darkness. Have you ever had to walk away from someone who couldn't see your worth? Drop a comment below and share your experience. And if this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more authentic stories about finding your own path. Remember, sometimes the hardest goodbyes lead to the most beautiful journeys. Thank you for listening, and I wish you the courage to honor your truth, whatever that looks like for you.